GHQ in Japan, a deep dive into the Allied occupation era. Introduction. Hello, today, I would like to introduce the occupation policy conducted by GHQ. After Japan's defeat in World War II, GHQ descended upon a burnt-out and battered Japan and occupied and ruled it as the victorious nation. GHQ dismantled the various systems, institutions, culture, and oversight of the pre-war Japanese Empire and rebuilt them to suit the convenience of the victorious nation. GHQ's post-war remodeling and transformation of Japan is known as the occupation policy. 79 years after the war, the occupation policy implemented by GHQ during this period is still in effect. The system of domination established at that time has been passed down through the generations and continues to bind and constrain Japan today. In this video, we will take a closer look at the occupation policies implemented by GHQ. On August 14, 1945, the then Japanese imperial government notified the acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration by the Allied powers, and on August 15, 1945, Emperor Showa read the imperial rescript of the end of war, ending World War II. The war ended with Japan's defeat and the Allied victory. Half a month later, on August 30, 1945, Douglas MacArthur, appointed Supreme Commander of the Allied forces by President Truman, arrived at Atsugi Airfield. On September 2, Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu and Chief of Staff Uematsu Yoshijiro signed the instrument of surrender on the deck of the U.S. battleship Missouri, which was anchored in Tokyo Bay. The content of this unconditional surrender document was, simply put, the prohibition of hostilities by the Japanese people against the Allied government and the unconditional acceptance of the occupation by the Allied Commander-in-Chief. With this document, the U.S. and other Allied forces officially placed Japan under military occupation. GHQ stands for General Headquarters, the Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces. In Japan, it is also called the Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers General Headquarters. It was an organization that enforced the Allied policies of the United States and other Western powers on the Japanese government and people. President Truman entrusted MacArthur with this important role because MacArthur was personally bent on revenge for the past betrayals by the Japanese military. During World War II, Douglas MacArthur, as Commander-in-Chief of Allied forces in the Southwest Pacific, was on a daily offensive against the Japanese. He suffered heavy defeats in the battles of Luzon and the Philippines. Driven into a corner, MacArthur fled for his life to Australia, leaving behind more than 70,000 soldiers. Abandoned by MacArthur, the remaining soldiers surrendered and became prisoners of war, dying in large numbers from malaria and malnutrition on their way to POW camps. By the time they arrived at the camp, the number of POWs had been reduced from 70,000 to about 50,000. This event, later called the Bataan Death March, left a stain and humiliation on MacArthur's career. It was at this point that MacArthur famously said, "I shall return." It was MacArthur's burning desire for vengeance against Japan that led him to accept the appointment. GHQ established its headquarters in the former Daiichi Saimai building in Yurakucho, Chiyoda-ku, Tokyo, and began its occupation policy. The organization was a large pyramid structure with Supreme Commander MacArthur at the top, 4 general staff offices, 13 staff divisions, and 5 foreign bureaus. Of these, the Civil Affairs Bureau was in charge of the practical implementation of GHQ's occupation policy. Although he was the Supreme Commander of the Allied powers, the majority of the GHQ staff were Americans. MacArthur first laid out the core strategy for carrying out the occupation policy in Japan. The 3 rupees were revenge, reform, and reconstruction. The 5 Ds were disarmament, demilitarization, deindustrialization, decentralization, and democratization, and the 3 SS were sports, sex, and screen. The goal of these occupation policies is to weaken the Japanese people. The priority policies promote democratization in particular, weakening the Japanese people as a whole with policies that allow them to enjoy subsidies and become lukewarm. MacArthur's strategy was based on the precise calculation that the Japanese people would be corrupted by the pursuit of personal pleasure and desire and would lose interest in the political economy and the ruling structure. This is what is meant by the first of the basic principles, revenge. MacArthur was keenly aware that the strength of the Japanese people was based on their strong spirit, altruism, perseverance, and diligence, as he had been defeated in the past by Japanese forces with hardcore strength of spirit. Under the false pretext of democratization, the occupation policy aimed to fish out and destroy these virtues of the Japanese people by feeding on their desires and pleasures. Anyone familiar with Japanese society knows that even today, more than 79 years after the war, the 3R5D3S strategy of GHQ led by MacArthur is still affecting the Japanese people and undermining every corner of Japanese society. The true intention of GHQ to democratize Japan was the most surprising of all the occupation policies pursued by the GHQ led by MacArthur. Many had anticipated a form of colonial rule that would govern through fear-mongering and force, especially considering the recent air raids and atomic bombings that had killed as many as 800,000 civilians in Japan. In the US, anti-Japanese sentiment was so strong that the International Military Tribunal for the Far East unilaterally judged the Japanese leaders of the time based on the justice of the Allied victors. In fact, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the air raids on various parts of Japan resulted in the deaths of approximately 800,000 people, according to a 1977 report by the Japanese Ministry of Health and Welfare. Consequently, it was only natural for the starving and impoverished Japanese people to harbor strong feelings of anxiety and fear towards the impending rule of the Allied forces, which had carried out these devastating attacks. However, GHQ later advocated for democratization, the exact opposite of what many had expected. This led to the establishment of licensed agencies for relief in Asia, which provided food and household assistance to Japan, creating a climate of GHQ worship among many Japanese citizens. This marked a complete departure from the militarism of the pre-war and wartime periods, when people were not free to express their opinions or pursue personal pleasures. However, this was the biggest trap that MacArthur set for the Japanese people. As mentioned earlier, MacArthur had first-hand experience with the strength of the old Japanese army and knew that the Japanese people, especially given their unshakable spirit, could once again pose a significant threat to the US, if left unchecked. Therefore, the most critical objective was to thoroughly dismantle the foundations that produced capable and strong leaders and dictators and to reshape the country into one with a pliant mentality and constitution that would weaken it, especially militarily. While ostensibly championing democratization, they gradually eroded and undermined Japan's most formidable aspects, such as its Buddhist valor and Bushido spirit, leading to a decline in the people's spirit. As a result, the Japanese people were humiliated and left to face unreasonable treatment by the victorious powers, helpless. The soft, self-interested, and weakened Japanese society of today bears little resemblance to the proud, defiant, and resilient Japan of the pre-war period. Weakened both militarily and spiritually, GHQ's primary goal, led by MacArthur to promote democracy, was achieved with significant consequences. Despite this, as the Cold War intensified, GHQ recognized the need for Japan to play a role in the new geopolitical landscape. In 1948, as the Soviet-backed Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea, and the US-backed Republic of Korea, South Korea, declared independence successively, tensions on the Korean peninsula escalated. In response, Secretary of War Lewis criticized GHQ's excessively lenient military policy towards Japan. He argued that Japan needed to be supported in its economic recovery and encouraged to become self-reliant and a bulwark against the spread of communism before it was weakened beyond repair. The administration at the time took these recommendations to heart, leading to a shift in GHQ's policies towards economic reconstruction, political stability, and rearmament. In response to this new direction from GHQ, Shigeru Yoshida of the Liberal Party, which emerged in October 1948, began to conservatively pursue opportunities for independence. The outbreak of the Korean War in 1950 prompted the US to demand Japan's rearmament. Prime Minister Yoshida, discerning the delicate balance between rearmament and economic recovery, engaged in tenacious negotiations with the US, defending Japan's pacifist constitution while advocating for Japan's sovereignty and security. As a result of these negotiations, Japan established the National Police Reserve, a minimal deterrent force, in agreement with the US. This organization later became the precursor to the self-defense forces. Prime Minister Yoshida's strategic patience and negotiation skills culminated in the signing of the San Francisco Peace Treaty in 1951, which finally restored Japan's sovereignty as an independent nation. Ultimately, GHQ's occupation of Japan lasted until 1952, marking the end of a pivotal chapter in Japan's history as the nation embarked on a path to recovery and reintegration into the international community. Conclusion. In this video, we have explored the occupation policies of GHQ, which continue to influence Japan to this day. While these policies were deemed necessary by the Allies and the US to prevent future conflicts, they have left a lasting impact on Japanese society and governance. The Japanese perspective on this period is complex, shaped by experiences of hardship, transformation, and eventual recovery. Discussions on Japanese news platforms and social media reflect a society that, despite facing economic challenges, has not resorted to the kind of public unrest seen in other countries. This restraint is partly attributable to the legacy of the GHQ occupation, which has significantly influenced Japan's political and educational systems. 79 years after the war, Japan still grapples with the effects of these policies, including the constitutional denial of belligerency, which has shaped its international relations and defense posture, particularly under the Japan-US Security Treaty. Our goal has been to provide insight into these complex issues and the nuanced feelings of the Japanese people towards their history. That's it for today's video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. Feel free to share parts of this video as long as you provide a clear link to this video and our channel. Our goal is to spread knowledge about Japan to people all around the world, so please use this content freely. However, if you intend to monetize using our content, we may request a portion of the earnings. Using this content maliciously is strictly prohibited. Moreover, we cannot compensate for any disadvantages or issues arising from the use of this content.